Are you completely stupid? The words, thick with contempt, hung in the air like poison. Isabella's heart hammered. Not anger, not yet. Just a cold, sinking dread. All those years wasted? But here's the thing. Finch, the titan of tech arrogance, he misread her silence. He saw a waitress, not a linguist, not a woman fighting to save her family. Big mistake. He had no clue she understood his precious algorithms better than he did. None. And that little spill, it wasn't just water, it was the first crack in his billion-dollar empire. Compassion can be a weapon, and sometimes kindness is a silent promise of reckoning. They had no idea how her quiet kindness would change everything. Stay with me as we uncover how a simple act of disrespect revealed a fatal character flaw, and how the woman he tried to humiliate ended up holding the keys to his downfall. The air inside Listenock wasn't just conditioned, it was curated. It carried the scent of money, a subtle bouquet of old leather beeswax from the polished mahogany, and the faintest hint of truffle oil from the kitchen. This was where New York's gods of finance and industry came to dine, a hushed cathedral of commerce, where billion-dollar deals were sketched on cocktail napkins, and careers were made or broken between the appetizer and the main course. And in the center of this gilded cage, moving with a grace that belied the 18-hour days she often worked, was Isabella Rossi. To the patrons, if they noticed her at all, Isabella was just part of the exquisite scenery. Her uniform was immaculate, a crisp black dress with a starched white apron, her dark hair pulled back in a severe but elegant shiny. She was 24, but her eyes held a weariness that belonged to someone much older. They were intelligent, observant eyes, constantly scanning her station, anticipating a patron's need for more water before they knew it themselves, ensuring a fork was replaced the second it touched the floor, all with an economy of motion that was almost invisible. Isabella wasn't meant to be here. 3 years ago, she had been the star student in Columbia University's linguistics program, fluent in 5 languages with a thesis on computational semantics that had professors buzzing. But then her father's construction business had collapsed, followed swiftly by a heart attack that left him buried in medical debt. The scholarships vanished. The academic future dissolved. And Isabella found herself in the one place she knew she could make enough in tips to keep her family afloat: the world of fine dining. She had traded syntax trees for wine lists, but she brought the same ferocious intelligence and discipline to her new role. She wasn't just a waitress. She was an orchestrator of experiences, a silent guardian of perfection. Tonight, Table 7 was the nexus of the universe. It was the most secluded table in the restaurant, a corner booth upholstered in deep burgundy velvet that offered both privacy and a commanding view of the room. It had been booked under the name Creed. Isabella knew the name. Everyone did. Damian Creed was old money, a titan from an era of handshake deals and ironclad honor. His empire, Creed Holdings, was a sprawling conglomerate of shipping logistics and real estate, a bedrock of the global economy. He was in his late 60s with a man of silver hair and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. When he entered, the very atmosphere of the restaurant seemed to defer to him. He moved with a quiet, unhurried confidence, his bronze suit hanging perfectly on his broad frame. He was polite, greeting the maître by name and nodding to Isabella with a warm, respectful glance that made her feel seen. His dining companion was his polar opposite. A-lister Finch arrived 10 minutes late, a whirlwind of restless energy and palpable arrogance. He was the tech world's reigning demon king, the CEO of Ethereum Dynamics, a company that had revolutionized supply chain management with its predictive AI. Finch was barely 40. Dressed in a ridiculously expensive but intentionally casual designer hoodie, raw denim jeans, and pristine white sneakers that probably cost more than Isabella's monthly rent. He didn't walk. He strode a Patek Philippe watch gleaming on his wrist as he jabbed at his phone, a Bluetooth earpiece still blinking in one ear. He didn't acknowledge the staff brushing past the maître and sliding into the booth opposite Creed, immediately placing his phone face up on the table. It buzzed incessantly. "Damian, good to see you," Finch said, his voice loud enough to turn a few heads. It was a statement, not a greeting. Traffic was a nightmare. "Let's get to it." I had my team draw up the final schematics for the Chimera integration. Damian Creed simply smiled, a patient, almost reptilian stillness in his eyes. He gestured subtly to Isabella. "Let's order first, Alestister. Allow the lady to do her job." Isabella stepped forward, her notepad in hand. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I start you with some water? We have a still aquapana or a sparkling San Pelro." Finch waved a dismissive hand without looking at her. "Whatever. Just bring water. I'll have the aquapana." "Thank you," Creed said, his gaze meeting Isabella's. "And please tell us about the specials when you have a moment." Isabella gave a small professional nod. "Of course, sir." As she turned to leave, she heard Finch mutter to Creed, "Seriously, specials. We have $3 billion to discuss, and you want to talk about duck confit." Isabella felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. It was going to be a long night. She retreated to the service station, her mind already cataloging the two men. Creed was a lion, powerful but composed, aware of his place in the food chain. Finch was a jackal, snapping and barking to prove he belonged, mistaking noise for power. It was a distinction Isabella, a student of communication, understood all too well. The silent language of the room was already telling a story, and she had a front row seat. The dinner began as a masterclass in contrasts. Damian Creed was the picture of old-world etiquette. He listened intently, his hands resting calmly on the table. He tasted his wine, a 1982 Chateau Margaux that Alistair Finch had ordered, with the cavalier pronouncement, "Bring me your most expensive red," with a connoisseur's respect, complimenting the sommelier on its perfect temperature. He addressed Isabella as Miss, and always made eye contact when speaking to her. Alestister Finch, on the other hand, treated the table as his personal command center. His phone was a constant buzzing third guest. He took 2 calls, speaking in clipped, aggressive sentences filled with tech jargon. "No route the beta test through the Frankfurt servers. I don't care about the latency. Just do it." He barked into his phone, oblivious to the other diners. He interrogated Isabella about the menu, as if cross-examining a hostile witness. "This seared foie gras. Is it flash-seared or pan-seared? What's the exact temperature? Is the balsamic reduction aged for 12 or 15 years? Isabella answered each question calmly and precisely. "It is pan-seared at a high temperature to create a Maillard crust, sir. The reduction is from a 15-year-old Madeira balsamic." She knew the menu inside and out, having spent hours memorizing not just the ingredients, but the philosophy behind each dish. It was a point of professional pride. Finch just grunted, unconvinced. "Fine, I'll have that and make it quick." The main topic of conversation was Project Chimera, a monumental undertaking. Creed Holdings owned one of the world's largest fleets of cargo ships, ports, and warehouses. A physical empire of logistics built over a century. Ethereum Dynamics had the AI, the digital brain that could predict global demand, optimize shipping routes in real time to avoid storms or political unrest, and automate port operations, potentially saving Creed Holdings billions and cementing Ethereum's dominance in the industry. The deal was a $3 billion partnership, a fusion of old world muscle and new world intellect. "The synergistic integration is flawless," Damian, Finch boasted, swiping through charts on a tablet he'd produced from his bag. "My algorithm can increase your fleet efficiency by 34% in the first fiscal year." 34%. We're talking about a paradigm shift. This isn't just a deal, it's the future of global commerce. Damian Creed nodded slowly, his eyes unreadable. He seemed less interested in the glowing charts on the tablet and more interested in the man presenting them. He watched how Finch interrupted him mid-sentence. He watched how Finch never once said please or thank you to Isabella when she refilled his glass. He watched how Finch's leg bounced restlessly under the table, a constant thrum of impatient energy. Isabella moved around them like a ghost, silent and efficient. She cleared plates, crumbed the table, and ensured their glasses were never empty. With every pass, she caught snippets of the conversation. Finch spoke of disruption, aggressive market capture, and trimming inefficiencies. Isabella knew trimming inefficiencies was corporate speak for firing thousands of people. These were the dock workers, the warehouse managers, the truckers. People like her father whose lives would be upended by the very algorithm Finch was so proud of. The tension was a low hum, a ticking clock that only Isabella and Damian Creed seemed to hear. Alistair Finch was completely deaf to it. He was performing, convinced his brilliance was so overwhelming that the formalities of human decency were mere suggestions he could choose to ignore. As Isabella approached to pour more of the chat Margot, Finch gestured impatiently with his hand, not looking up from his tablet. "Just leave the bottle," he snapped. "It is our policy to pour for our guests, sir, to ensure the wine breathes properly," Isabella explained softly, her voice a model of professional decorum. Finch finally looked up at her, his eyes cold and dismissive. "I'm not paying $1,000 for a bottle of grape juice to have you interrupt my meeting every 5 minutes. Leave the bottle." A deep silence fell over the table. Damian Creed's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He looked from Finch's snarling face to Isabella's calm, composed expression. She simply inclined her head. "As you wish, sir," she said, placing the bottles safely on the table, ensuring the label faced him. She then retreated her back straight, her steps measured. Creed took a slow sip of his wine, his gaze lingering on Alistair. "She was only doing her job, and doing it exceptionally well." Finch scoffed. "She's a waitress, Damian. Her job is to be invisible and bring me things. Let's not overthink it." Now about the Q3 projections. But Damian Creed wasn't looking at the projections anymore. He was watching Isabella as she moved to another table, effortlessly switching to fluent French to speak with a pair of tourists. He saw the tourists smile, their faces relaxing at the sound of their native tongue. He saw a flicker of something in Isabella, a spark of intellect, a wellspring of grace under pressure. And then he looked back at the self-proclaimed genius opposite him, a man who couldn't see past the apron to the person wearing it. The clock was ticking faster now, counting down to a moment of impact that no one, least of all Alistair Finch, could ever have predicted. The main course arrived, a magnificent roasted duck for Damian Creed, and the seared foie gras for Alistair Finch. Isabella placed the plates with practiced precision, announcing each dish in a low, clear voice. Finch didn't even look up from his phone, where he was now furiously typing a text message with his thumb. "Sir, your foie gras," Isabella said carefully, setting the plate before him. As she did the corner of her service tray, a heavy silver platter she'd been using to carry away their bread plates, lightly brushed against the side of Alistair's water glass. It was the barest of touches, a millimeter miscalculation in a dance she'd performed 1,000 times. But the glass was overfilled, beaded with condensation, and perched precariously close to the edge of the table, where Finch had shoved it to make room for his gadgets. Time seemed to slow down. The glass wobbled a tiny, deadly pirouette on the white linen. A few drops of ice-cold water splashed onto the back of Alistair Finch's hand, the one holding his phone. The reaction was not just disproportionate, it was volcanic. Finch shot up from his seat, yanking his hand back as if he'd been burned by acid. "What the hell?" he roared. The entire restaurant, which had been a low murmur of civilized conversation, fell deathly silent. Every eye turned to table 7. "Watch what you're doing, you clumsy idiot," he shouted, his face contorting into a mask of pure rage. He glared at the few drops of water on his hand and then at his phone, frantically wiping it on the tablecloth. Isabella froze her heart, hammering against her ribs. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, a wave of heat rising to her cheeks. "Sir, I am so terribly sorry. It was an accident," she said, her voice trembling slightly but still clear. Her training kicked in, and she immediately reached for a fresh napkin to help, but Finch slapped her hand away. "Don't touch me. An accident. You think I care if it was an accident? This is a $20,000 phone. Do you have any idea what's on here? Incompetence is what it is. Pure, simple incompetence." Damian Creed placed his knife and fork down on his plate with a quiet, deliberate clink. He watched the scene unfold with an unnerving calm, his face an impassive mask, but his eyes were like chips of ice. Isabella stood her ground, retracting her hand. "I assure you, sir, your phone will be fine. It was only a few drops of water. Again, I offer my sincerest apologies." Her composure, her refusal to crumble or burst into tears, seemed to infuriate Finch even more. He was used to people cowering. He wanted her to gravel. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss that was somehow more terrifying than his shout. He looked her up and down, a sneer of utter contempt on his lips. Apologies don't fix things, he spat. People like you just don't get it. You have one simple job. One, put the plate on the table, and you can't even do that without screwing it up. He leaned in, and the final fatal words slipped out, dripping with condescension. Are you completely stupid? The word hung in the silent air, ugly and sharp. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict, a judgment delivered from on high by a man who believed his net worth gave him the right to define the intelligence of others. For Isabella, the world went into slow motion. She heard the word, and it was like a physical blow. Stupid. After all the years of academic excellence, the all-nighters, the passion for knowledge, the sacrifice she had made for her family, it all came down to this. In this man's eyes, she was nothing more than a stupid girl in an apron. A flicker of raw hurt crossed her face, so fleeting that only a truly observant person would have caught it. Then something inside her snapped, not in a fit of anger, but in a moment of absolute clarity. The fear vanished, replaced by a wall. Hard resolve, the years of being invisible, of biting her tongue, of smiling through insults from entitled patrons. It all coalesced into a single point of steel in her spine. She straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and met Alistair Finch's furious gaze with an expression of unshakable calm. She did not cry. She did not shout. She simply held his gaze. And across the table, Damian Creed saw it all. He saw the accidental spill. He saw Finch's monstrous overreaction. He saw the cruel, unnecessary insult. But most importantly, he saw the moment the waitress, this young woman, refused to be broken. He saw the fire ignite in her eyes, a quiet dignity that was more powerful than all of Alistair Finch's blustering rage. The ticking clock had stopped. The bomb had gone off. But the person left standing in the wreckage wasn't the one anyone expected. The $3 billion deal was hanging by a thread, and Alistair Finch, the genius, the visionary, was far too stupid to realize he was the one holding the scissors. The silence in Lenica was absolute, a heavy blanket of shock and secondhand embarrassment. Alistair Finch stood there, chest puffed out, still glaring at Isabella, expecting her to dissolve into tears or be summarily fired by the approaching Maitre. He was waiting for his victory, a public validation of his dominance. It never came. Isabella did not break his gaze. Her face remained a mask of professional neutrality, but her eyes were alive with a new light. The hurt had been replaced by something else focus. She took one small, deliberate breath. Then she spoke. Her voice was no longer the soft, differential tone of a waitress. It was crisp, level, and possessed a chilling precision. No, Mr. Finch, she said, her voice carrying easily through the silent room. I am not stupid, but you may have just made a very stupid mistake. Finch blinked, taken aback by her audacity. What did you just say to me? He hissed. Before he could continue, Isabella's gaze flickered from his face down to the tablet still glowing on the table, displaying the complex charts for Project Chimera. Her eyes, trained to find patterns in arcane texts and complex codes, scanned the screen for a fraction of a second. She had been absorbing bits and pieces of their conversation all night, and now, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, her mind connected the dots with lightning speed. She looked at Damian Creed, a silent apology in her eyes for the breach of protocol, and then back at Finch. You've been discussing the integration of your predictive logistics AI with Mr. Creed's shipping fleet, she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. You mentioned rerouting through Frankfurt to test latency, and you keep referring to your core algorithm's principle of Voroshan Gahorum. Finch's jaw tightened. I'm not discussing my business with the help. Isabella ignored him, her focus absolute. The phrase you're using, she continued her pronunciation of the German flawless Voroshander Gehorsam. It means anticipatory obedience. It's a concept often associated with proactively following orders one assumes will be given. A dangerous principle in both military history and, I would argue, in closed-loop AI systems, where it can lead to catastrophic feedback loops and confirmation bias. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. Damian Creed leaned forward, his expression one of rapt attention. He had recognized the term one Finch had used repeatedly as a mark of his supposed erudition. However, Isabella went on, judging by your schematics on the screen, the ones showing dynamic routing based on emergent data rather than preemptive action, I believe the principle you meant to refer to is Fingerspitzengefühl. Again, the German was perfect. It means fingertip feeling, an intuitive, instinctive flair for making the right decision at the right time. It's about responsive adaptation, not blind anticipation. One is a philosophy of flexible genius. The other is a recipe for disaster in a system as complex as global shipping. She took another small breath. You're selling Mr. Creed a system of fingerspits and gaffle while calling it Voroschander Gahorm. You are either misrepresenting your own product or you don't fully understand the philosophical underpinnings of the very terms you use to describe it. So to answer your question, Mr. Finch, no, I'm not stupid, but I'm beginning to have serious doubts about you. The entire room was stunned into a new dimension of silence. Alistair Finch's face, which had been red with rage, slowly drained of all color, leaving a pasty, sickly white. He looked as if Isabella had just stripped him bare in the middle of his own boardroom. He, the tech visionary, the self-proclaimed genius, had just been publicly dissected and corrected on the specifics of his own sales pitch by a waitress. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The sheer, unadulterated humiliation had rendered him mute. The maître, who had been rushing over to discipline Isabella, stopped dead in his tracks, his mouth agape. Isabella stood tall and calm amidst the wreckage she had created. The timid waitress was gone. In her place stood the Columbia linguistic scholar, the formidable intellect who had been hiding in plain sight all along. She hadn't just defended herself. She had turned her attacker's own intellectual vanity into a weapon and used it to dismantle him with surgical precision. Finally, Damian Creed moved. He slowly lifted his wine glass, not to drink, but as a gesture. He angled it towards Isabella, a small, almost imperceptible nod of profound respect. He then turned his cool, assessing gaze upon the shell-shocked man opposite him. The spell was broken. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been completely and irrevocably inverted. And the deal, the $3 billion future of global commerce, was now on life support. Its fate resting not on algorithms or projections, but on the quiet, dignified fury of a man who valued character above all else. The silence that followed Isabella's dissection of Alistair Finch's pitch was different. It was no longer shocked, it was contemplative. The other diners, the titans of finance and law, were no longer just watching a scene. They were witnessing a reckoning. Alistair Finch finally found his voice a choked, strangled whisper. "You're fired," he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Isabella. "You're finished." A low chuckle emanated from across the table. It was Damian Creed. He placed his napkin neatly beside his plate and folded his hands. The smile on his face did not reach his eyes. "You seem to be under the impression that you have some authority here." Alistair Creed said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of undisputed power. "You are a guest in this establishment, and you are a guest at my table. You will not speak to this young woman or anyone that way again." Finch, desperate to regain control, turned on Creed. "Damian, this is insane. She humiliated me. We're talking about a $3 billion deal. Are you going to let a nobody waitress derail the most important partnership of the decade over a little spilled water?" Damian Creed's expression hardened. The feigned warmth vanished, replaced by the cold, hard face of the man who commanded a global empire. "A little spilled water. Is that what you think this is about?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping low for their ears. Only yet it seemed to dominate the entire room. "I grew up in Hell's Kitchen, Alistair. Not the sanitized version you see today, but the old Hell's Kitchen of the 1960s. My father was a longshoreman on the docks. This deal of yours would seek to optimize." My mother was a waitress. She worked double shifts at a diner for 25 years, wearing shoes with holes in them so that I could have a coat without holes in it. She came home every night with aching feet and varicose veins smelling of coffee and grease, and she never once complained. Creed's eyes bored into Finch. She served men far more powerful and far richer than you will ever be. Men who built the city, and they treated her with respect. They called her by her name. They knew her son was trying to make something of himself. They treated her with dignity because they understood something you, with all your algorithms and disruptive technologies, will never grasp. A person's true character is not measured by how they treat their equals. It is measured by how they treat those they believe to be beneath them. He gestured with his head toward Isabella, who stood frozen, listening to this unexpected defense, this baring of a soul. Tonight I watched you. I watched you dismiss the staff, snap your fingers, and bark orders. I saw you treat this young woman, who has shown more grace and intelligence in the last 5 minutes than you have all evening, as if she were a piece of software, a function to be executed. You didn't see a person. You saw an obstacle, an inefficiency. Creed picked up his wine glass and swirled the deep red liquid. My company, Alistair, is not just a collection of assets and logistics chains. It is a family. It is built on the loyalty of thousands of employees, many of whom have been with us for generations. The men and women on my docks and my warehouses, at the helms of my ships, they are the bedrock of Creed Holdings. If you treat a waitress this way because she accidentally spilled a few drops of water, how would you treat them? How would you treat my people when your flawless algorithm calculates that 10,000 of them are redundant? He set the glass down with a soft final thud. You answered that question for me tonight. You showed me your character, and it is deeply, fatally flawed. Alistair Finch sat there, his tech bro swagger completely gone, replaced by the dawning horror of a man watching his future burn to the ground. Damien, wait, I was under pressure. I'm not what you are, Creed said, his voice cutting like a shard of glass. Is a man who mistakes wealth for worth? You believe your success absolves you from the basic requirements of human decency. You are a liability. Your lack of respect is a strategic weakness, and I will not have it anywhere near my company or my people. Damien Creed rose from his seat, standing to his full imposing height. He looked directly at Alistair Finch, his eyes devoid of any emotion, save for a cold finality. So to be perfectly clear, this meeting is over. Our negotiations are terminated. Project Chimera is dead. He paused, letting the words sink in. The deal is off, Mr. Finch. He then turned his back on the speechless billionaire. He walked over to Isabella, his expression softening. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a black leather wallet, and produced not a tip, but a simple, elegant business card. Miss Rosie, he said, his voice now warm and sincere, I am deeply sorry for the behavior you were forced to endure tonight on my account. No one should ever be spoken to in such a manner. He offered her the card. Your erudition is as impressive as your composure. If you ever decide you are finished with this line of work, my office would be very interested in speaking with you. My executive assistant's name is on there. Call her. We will find a place for a mind like yours, Isabella. Her mind, reeling, took the card with a slightly trembling hand. The name was simple, Damien Creed. Underneath it, a single phone number and an email address. Creed gave her another respectful nod, then turned to the maître. Please add a $5,000 tip to my bill for this young lady's service and ensure she is not reprimanded in any way for tonight's events. They were, shall we say, educational. With that, Damien Creed turned and walked out of Leak, leaving behind a shattered $3 billion deal, a humiliated tech mogul, and a 24-year-old waitress holding the key to a future she thought she had lost forever. The moment Damien Creed's formidable presence left the restaurant, the spell of silence shattered. A wave of whispers erupted, the sound of 100 wealthy patrons dissecting the corporate execution they had just witnessed. Alistair Finch remained frozen in his seat, his face a ghastly shade of pale. The buzzing from his phone on the table sounded like a swarm of angry hornets. He looked at it, then at Isabella, his eyes a mixture of pure hatred and utter disbelief. He had walked in as a king and was now a court jester. His humiliation served as the evening's main special. Without another word, he snatched his tablet and phone, shoved them into his bag, and stormed out of the restaurant, bumping into a waiter and not bothering to apologize. The door swung shut behind him, leaving a void where his colossal ego had been. Isabella was suddenly the center of a vortex. Her manager, the maître. Jean-Pierre rushed to her side, his face a mess of confusion and awe. Isabella Montura, are you all right? What? What was that? I'm fine, Jean. Pierre, she said, her voice still steady, though her hands were shaking, clutching the heavy cardstock of Damien Creed's business card. The staff treated her like a returning war hero. The Sumayer gave her a solemn nod of approval. The chef peeked out from the kitchen, a wide grin on his face. They had all endured the wrath of customers like Finch, but none had ever seen one so thoroughly and publicly dismantled. Isabella had become a legend in the space of 10 minutes. But for Isabella, the reality was more complex. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound sense of shock and a terrifying uncertainty. She had stood up for herself, yes, but she had also just provoked a powerful, vindictive billionaire. She had broken every rule of service. Jean-Pierre might be impressed now, but what about tomorrow? Would Finch's connections get her blacklisted from every fine dining establishment in the city? Had she just sacrificed her family's only lifeline for a moment of righteous defiance? She finished her shift in a daze, going through the motions mechanically. The patrons who remained looked at her with a newfound respect, their gazes lingering. A few even offered her words of support as they left. "Well done, young lady," one elderly gentleman in finance whispered as he signed his check. When she finally left the restaurant in the early hours of the morning, the cool New York air felt like a balm on her flushed skin. She walked a few blocks to the subway, Damien Creed's business card, feeling like a lead weight in her pocket. The offer had been real, she knew. The look in his eyes had been sincere, but her world had been one of survival for so long that hope felt like a dangerous foreign concept. Could she really just call the office of one of the most powerful men in the world? What would she even say? She spent a sleepless night replaying the events in her mind. The condescending questions, the snap of his fingers, the ugly sneer on his face, the weight of that one word, stupid, and then the memory of Damien Creed's story about his mother. It was that story that resonated most deeply. He hadn't just been defending her, he had been defending the honor of every person who works tirelessly in the shadows. Every person whose labor makes the lives of men like Alistair Finch possible. The next morning, news of the deal's collapse began to leak. The financial blogs were on fire. Ethereum's 3B Creed deal mysteriously implodes, read one headline. Finch's volatility raises red flags for investors, said another. No one knew the real reason, but the speculation was rampant. Ethereum Dynamics stock, which had surged in anticipation of the deal, began to tremble. Isabella sat in her small, cramped apartment, the sounds of Brooklyn traffic outside her window. She looked at her sleeping father in the other room, his breathing shallow. She looked at the stack of bills on her kitchen table, and she looked at the business card sitting next to her cold cup of coffee. She was scared, but for the first time in 3 years, she was more inspired than she was afraid. She had been reminded of who she was before she was a waitress, a scholar, a thinker, a person of value. Damien Creed hadn't just offered her a job. He had offered her a path back to herself. With a deep breath that was half prayer, half resolve, she picked up her phone. She dialed the number on the card. Office of Damien Creed. This is Eleanor. A polite professional voice answered. Isabella's heart pounded. Hello, she said, her voice clearer than she expected. My name is Isabella Rossi. Mr. Creed gave me his card last night. He told me to call. There was a brief pause on the other end, but no confusion. Ah, Miss Rossi. Yes, Mr. Creed informed me you might be calling. He was exceptionally impressed. He has already cleared his schedule. Can you be at our headquarters at 2 p.m. today? Isabella was stunned. He had been expecting her. He had already made time. Yes, she managed to say. Yes, I can. Excellent. We look forward to seeing you, Miss Rossi. When she hung up the phone, Isabella looked at her reflection in the dark screen. The tired waitress was gone. In her place was a woman on the verge of a new beginning, a woman who had been insulted, underestimated, and unmasked all in a single night. She had lost a job but was about to gain a future, proving that sometimes the most catastrophic endings are just brilliant beginnings in disguise. The Creed Holdings building was not just a structure, It was a statement, a sheer cliff of obsidian glass and dark steel rising from the heart of Park Avenue. It seemed to absorb the morning light rather than reflected a quiet behemoth among the city's glittering titans. It exuded a silent gravitational power that Isabella felt in her bones as she stood across the street, the simple business card clutched in her hand. Her morning had been a surreal ballet of anxiety and hope. She had woken before dawn in her small Brooklyn apartment, the familiar rumble of the elevated train her constant companion. She'd stood before her closet, a meager collection of worn-out clothes, and felt a pang of profound inadequacy. What does one wear to potentially reclaim a lost future? She settled on the only professional outfit she owned, a simple knee-length black skirt and a crisp white blouse she'd bought for a scholarship interview 4 years ago. It felt like a costume from a different lifetime. As she ironed it for the third time, her father had emerged from his room, leaning heavily on his cane. He didn't say much, but his eyes, weary but clear, shone with a fierce, terrified pride. "You show them what a Ross he is made of, Toro mio." He'd whispered, his voice thick with emotion. His hope was a heavy, precious weight on her shoulders. The subway ride from her world to theirs was a journey through 1,000 different lives. Surrounded by the tired, determined faces of everyday New Yorkers, she pulled out her phone not to scroll through social media, but to open a file buried deep in her cloud storage, her thesis, computational semantics, and the mitigation of ambiguity in cross-lingual contractual law. As she read her own words, the complex theories and elegant proofs a part of her she thought had died flickered back to life. The passion, the intellectual fire, the fierce joy of wrestling with a difficult idea, it was all still there, dormant beneath layers of exhaustion and the practiced humility of a service worker. By the time she emerged from the subway into the rarefied air of Midtown Manhattan, she was no longer just Isabella the waitress. She was Isabella Rossi, the scholar arming herself with her own forgotten brilliance. Now standing before the building, the imposter syndrome returned with a vengeance. Men in bespoke suits and women with 1,000 handbags swept past her, exuding an effortless confidence she couldn't begin to fathom. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she crossed the street and pushed through the heavy glass doors. The lobby was a cathedral of corporate power, soaring ceilings, floors of polished Italian marble that reflected the frantic digital stock ticker running along one wall, and a silence so profound it seemed to have its own sound. The air smelled of clean, cold money. At the massive marble reception desk, a woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and an icy demeanor looked up. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes flicking over Isabella's simple outfit with a barely concealed dismissal. "I'm here to see Mr. Creed," Isabella said, her voice sounding small in the cavernous space. "My name is Isabella Rossi." The receptionist's perfectly plucked eyebrow rose a fraction. She typed the name into her computer, her expression one of bored skepticism. Then her face changed. The skepticism vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed, almost comical surprise. Her entire posture shifted from gatekeeper to aide-de. "Miss Rossi, of course, my apologies. We've been expecting you." She gestured to a private bank of elevators. "Please go right ahead. Penthouse floor." The elevator ride was a silent, shockingly fast ascent. Watching the floors blur past, Isabella felt as if she were literally rising above her old life. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into a reception area that was more like a luxurious private library. The woman who greeted her was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an aura of quiet competence that was far more intimidating than the receptionist downstairs. "Miss Rossi, I'm Elena Vance, Mr. Creed's executive assistant," she said, her voice warm but precise. "It's a pleasure to meet you." It was the voice from the phone call. "It's a pleasure to meet you too," Isabella managed, shaking her offered hand. "Mr. Creed is just finishing a call." "Please," she said, gesturing to a leather armchair. As Isabella sat, Elena regarded her with a frank curiosity. "He hasn't cleared his schedule midday for an unscheduled external meeting in 5 years, she said as if thinking aloud. "You certainly made an impression." "It wasn't exactly my intention," Isabella admitted with a wry smile. Elena's expression softened. "The best impressions rarely are. He told me what happened. He also told me he saw in you what he values most, grace under fire. You'll find that's the only currency that truly matters on this floor. Just then a door opened and Damian Creed emerged, dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. He looked more like a university professor than a corporate titan. He bypassed his massive mahogany desk and came directly toward her, his hand extended and a genuine smile on his face. "Isabella, thank you for coming." "I'm so glad you called," he said. "Please come in. Can Eleanor get you some coffee? I promise the service is impeccable and no one will spill it." The small joke, a shared secret between them, instantly dissolved the last of her tension. "Thank you, sir. I'm fine." He led her to a seating area near the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, which offered a god's-eye view of the city sprawling below. The office was a reflection of the man walls lined with books on history and maritime law, intricate models of cargo ships from different eras, and framed nautical charts of ancient trade routes. It was the office of a builder, not a trader. "I trust you've had some time to process the events of last night." He began, his tone gentle. "It still doesn't feel entirely real," she confessed. "I assure you it was," he said, "and I meant what I said. I had my team send for your academic records this morning from Columbia." Elena, he nodded to his assistant, who discreetly placed a thin file on the coffee table, was kind enough to summarize them for me. "But I find summaries often lack the soul of a thing. Tell me about your work, Isabella, in your own words. Why computational semantics? What is it about the intersection of language and machines that fascinates you?" This was not the interview she had expected. He wasn't testing her. He was inviting her to be herself. A spark ignited within her. "Language is the operating system of human civilization." "Mr. Creed," she began, her voice gaining confidence, "but it's messy. It's filled with ambiguity, context, and nuance. Things machines find very difficult. A single misplaced comma in a legal contract can cost millions. A cultural misunderstanding in a negotiation can scuttle a deal. My thesis was about creating an AI framework that doesn't just translate words, it translates intent. It learns the context, the legal precedents, the cultural idioms to flag potential ambiguities before they become problems. It's about making communication not just faster, but safer." As she spoke, she saw a new level of interest in his eyes. He leaned forward, fully engaged. "Go on, think of it like one of your shipping routes," she said, improvising an analogy. "A standard translation program is like a map that shows you the shortest distance from port A to port B. But my system is like an experienced captain. It knows about the hidden reefs of legal jargon, the sudden storms of cultural fauture, the tricky currents of subtext. It doesn't just plot a course. It ensures the cargo, the meaning arrives intact." Damian sat back, a slow, deeply impressed smile spreading across his face. "An experienced captain," he repeated softly. "That is the best explanation of the value of AI I have ever heard." He looked at her, his gaze direct and serious. "Last night I told you Alistair Finch's weakness was his character. His arrogance is a strategic blindfold. He built a system to predict the future, but couldn't see the person standing right in front of him. My company's greatest vulnerability isn't storms or pirates. It's misunderstanding, the very thing your work aims to solve." He slid the file across the table to her. It wasn't her academic record. It was a formal job offer. "I'm not a man who believes in charity, Isabella. I believe in investing in talent. I want to create a new division within Creed Holdings built around you and your ideas. The Global Communications Strategy Initiative. You would be its director." He let that sink in before continuing. "This isn't a desk job. Your first 90 days would be a global assessment tour. You'll travel to our hubs in London, Singapore, and Hamburg. You'll meet our regional directors, our legal teams, our negotiators. You will listen to them, understand their challenges. Then you will come back here and build your team. I will give you access to our top engineers, a substantial budget, and a direct line of communication to me. Your mission is to turn your thesis from theory into the new central nervous system of my company." Isabella stared at the document, at the title, at the salary figure that made her head spin, but it was the final part of the offer that broke through her composure. "Furthermore," Creed said, his voice softening, "Creed Holdings will immediately assume and settle the entirety of your father's outstanding medical debts. We consider it a signing bonus, and we will establish an educational fund for you to complete your PhD at your own pace whenever you are ready. We are investing in your past, your present, and your future, Isabella. All we ask in return is your brilliance." That was when the tears finally came. They weren't tears of sadness or fear, but of a profound, earth-shattering relief. It was the release of years of pent-up grief, of the crushing weight of responsibility she had carried alone for so long. She wasn't just being offered a job, she was being given back her life. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Say you'll accept," Creed said gently. She looked up, wiping her eyes, and met his gaze. In his eyes, she saw not pity, but a deep, unwavering belief in her. And for the first time in years, she felt that same belief in herself. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and strong. The first week was a baptism by fire. Isabella was given a temporary office on the penthouse floor, a stone's throw from Creed's own. Elena took her under her wing, guiding her through the labyrinthine protocols of the corporation. There was skepticism, of course. She was an outsider, a 24-year-old with no corporate experience, handpicked by the CEO. In a meeting with the IT and legal departments, a cynical veteran IT director named Marcus Thorne made his disdain clear. "With all due respect, Miss Rosie," he'd said, his arms crossed, "we have multi-million-dollar translation software suites. What exactly do you, a linguistics major, bring to the table that they don't?" Instead of being intimidated, Isabella saw her opening. "Mr. Thorne, your software can translate the word yes in 100 languages. But can it tell you the difference between the yes that means I enthusiastically agree in German and the yes that means I hear you, but I do not agree in Japanese? Can it tell you when a contract's liability clause, translated perfectly from Mandarin, actually conflicts with a precedent in EU maritime law? Your software translates words. I'm here to build a system that understands worlds. There's a difference." A silence fell over the room. Marcus Thorne stared at her, his cynical smirk slowly fading, replaced by a grudging respect. From that moment on, she had the full cooperation of his department. The most profound moment of that first week, however, happened outside the office. It was a phone call she made from the privacy of her new, still empty office overlooking the city. She dialed the number for the hospital billing department. After navigating the automated menus, she spoke to a clerk. "Yes, I'm calling to settle the account of Mr. Antonio Rossi," she said, her heart pounding. She gave the account number, which was burned into her memory. "Okay," the clerk said tiredly. "The outstanding balance is $187, for my $216. Music. How would you like to make a payment today?" Isabella took a deep breath. "I'd like to pay the full amount right now." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Excuse me?" the clearer finally asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Isabella calmly read out the Creed Holdings corporate account number Elena had given her. After a few moments of frantic typing, the clerk came back on the line, her tone completely transformed. "Ma'am, the payment has been approved. The balance is zero. Your father's account is settled in full." Hanging up the phone, Isabella leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt the freedom of an open sky. The boardroom in Creed Holdings, Geneva headquarters, was perched above the tranquil waters of Lake Geneva. Inside, however, the atmosphere was electric. Isabella, dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue suit, stood at the head of a gleaming conference table, commanding the attention of the company's entire European executive board. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the interface of her Rosetta Initiative School. It was no longer a theory, it was a powerful functioning tool. "As you can see," she said, her voice resonating with quiet authority, "the system has flagged a potential conflict in Section 4B of the proposed merger with the Dubois shipping line. While the French to English translation is technically accurate, our system has cross-referenced it with Monsieur Dubois' past negotiation tactics and recent changes in French labor law. It predicts he is using the term personnel contingent to imply non-UN contractors, which would put us in violation of our own ethical sourcing protocols. It recommends we counter with the more precise term employers directs and seek clarification." She switched to flawless French, directly addressing the French contingent of the board, explaining the nuance in their own language. The executives, who had been struggling with this very point for weeks, stared at her in awe. She had not only solved their problem, but had also given them the precise linguistic tool to win the negotiation. As the board erupted into a spirited multilingual discussion, Damien Creed, seated at the head of the table, caught her eye. He gave her a subtle, proud wink. It was a look that said, "I knew it. I knew that was who you were all along." Later, an older board member, a gruff German shipping magnate named Klaus, approached her. "Freund Rossi," he rumbled, "your system is remarkable. I read in the Financial Times that Ethereum Dynamics was finally sold off for parts at auction last month." Alistair Finch lost everything. The man had brilliant technology, but he was a fool. "He wasn't a fool, Herr Schmidt," Isabella replied calmly, looking out at the serene lake. "He was just a very poor linguist. He never understood that the most important words in any business are please and thank you." Looking at her reflection in the glass, she no longer saw the harried waitress from Leonical, nor the terrified girl in the Park Avenue lobby. She saw a woman who had been tested in the crucible, who had faced down humiliation with intellect and grace. She had found her voice, reclaimed her future, and was now charting her own course across a world of infinite possibilities, the quiet captain of her own magnificent destiny. The story of Isabella Rossi and Alistair Finch is a powerful reminder that our true selves are revealed in the small moments, in the unguarded interactions. It shows us that dignity is a currency more valuable than dollars, and respect is an investment that always pays dividends. Alistair Finch's empire was built on code, but it crumbled because of a defect in his character. Isabella was trapped by circumstance, but she was freed by her intellect and her refusal to be diminished. This story resonates because we have all at some point felt underestimated. We have all seen arrogance go unchecked. What does this story make you think about? Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's true character was revealed by how they treated another? Share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. I read every one of them. If this story moved you or made you think, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more true stories about the hidden dramas that shape our world. Thank you for listening.